Hello, everyone. Today, indeed, I came with something that surprised me. While watching international news, it says the U.S. Senate is out to control the Trump administration's back and forth Ukraine policy. What's going on? Why is the Senate out there trying to put the brakes on former President Trump's Ukraine policy? Let's solve this complicated situation one by one with me. Oh my God, have you seen this? Dear Abby, the news is that the Senate is out to control the Trump administration's back-and-forth policy on Ukraine. The first time I saw it, I was puzzled by the term conversion. How much policy has gone back and forth has led to the Senate? And what will the Senate do? It's not just about domestic politics in the United States. It's about the direction of the war in Ukraine and the country's international standing. Let's dig into this complex and interesting story together. First of all, let's take a look at why the Trump administration's Ukraine policy has come to be called an entrance. Former President Trump has been inconsistent on the issue of support for Ukraine since his time in office. Sometimes he seemed to promise strong support, but other times he said he could withhold or even withdraw it. The best case in point was in March 2025. When the Trump administration abruptly stopped providing Ukraine with intelligence and weapons. The sudden halt of aid to a country at war must have been devastating news for Ukraine, right? These unpredictable acts have caused great confusion and uncertainty, not only for Ukraine, but also for our allies. They must have made you wonder, is the United States a reliable partner? This difficult policy stance has led to people being evaluated as contingent and contingent. So why is the Senate trying to get this straight? The biggest reason is the uncertainty. Because the policies of the Trump administration were so unpredictable, Ukraine and our allies had no idea what was going to happen next. This uncertainty will be devastating for Ukraine at war. The fear of losing support at any time will be a major hindrance to our full-fledged fight. There is also growing concern that our allies, particularly those in Europe, could lose confidence in our leadership. If the United States fails to do its part as a strong ally, the entire international order could falter. The Senate has begun to move to address this uncertainty and to give American foreign policy predictability and stability, like a captain trying to steer and steer when the ship is on shaky ground. The key weapon the Senate brought up to put the brakes on the Trump administration's Ukraine policy is the National Defense Authorization Act. The NDAA is a very important piece of legislation that determines the U.S. defense budget and policy every year, and it attempts to limit the discretion of the administration by inserting certain provisions into it. They say the new rules are intended to prevent the administration from unilaterally suspending or altering its aid to Ukraine, for example, requiring congressional approval before suspending Ukraine aid, or requiring that a detailed report be submitted to Congress in the event of a suspension. This would prevent the administration from arbitrarily changing its policy, right? The Senate intends to use the legislation to install a guardrail in the Trump administration's Ukraine policy. The Senate's move is also a case in point to the important democratic principles of the United States checks and balance. The U.S. Constitution empowers Congress and the judiciary to keep the president's powers in check. Foreign policy is primarily the president's power, but Congress can influence the president's foreign policy through budgetary approval, declaration of war, ratification of treaties, and more. When the administration's policies create serious uncertainty in national security and alliances, it is critical for Congress to actively check them. The Senate is trying to prevent the administration's one-way traffic through the NDAA and make Ukraine aid policies more stable and predictable. This is not just an effort to keep the Trump administration in check, but to make sure that U.S. foreign policy is consistently pursued in accordance with the long-term interests and values of the country rather than at the will of a particular individual. Behind the back and forth of former President Trump's Ukraine policy is his unique foreign policy philosophy of America First. He has been skeptical about traditional alliances and the role of international organizations, putting America's interests first. For example, he criticized NATO allies for not spending enough on defense, and sometimes even mentioned the possibility of their withdrawal from NATO. This trend was reflected in the issue of Ukraine aid. He stressed the effectiveness of aid, or the direct interest of the United States, asking the question, why should the United States sacrifice itself for another country? It was this philosophy that sometimes Ukraine policy took an uncertain and unpredictable turn. So what's Ukraine's position on these internal moves by the U.S.? Ukraine relies heavily on U.S. military and economic support in its war against Russia. It's a matter of survival for Ukraine in that situation that U.S. policy changes back and forth. If the subsidy doesn't come in on time, or if the weapon shipment is delayed, it will inevitably cause great difficulties on the front line right away. This is especially true when the war is escalating, with Russia unleashing drone strikes on major Ukrainian cities. The Senate's move will be like a ray of light for Ukraine. At least it will give us hope that U.S. support will be predictable and stable. But at the same time, there will still be a lot of anxiety that America's domestic political situation could determine its fate. America's allies, especially those in Europe, have also expressed great concern about the Trump administration's Ukraine policy, because if American leadership is shaken, it could pose a direct threat to European security. European countries believe a strong alliance with the United States is essential to countering Russia's threats. When the United States shows unpredictable behavior or belittles the value of the alliance, it raises the fundamental question, can we trust the United States? The Senate move may provide them with relief that the Congress still recognizes the importance of the alliance. But at the same time, there may still be lingering fears that the outcome of the presidential election could result in a major shift in foreign policy. How will the Senate play out in its attempt to control the policy of Ukraine? Through the NDRA, if it does, it will restrict the administration's discretion and ensure more stable support for Ukraine. But the key is how Trump will react to it. He has expressed strong dissatisfaction with congressional checks. Furthermore, depending on the outcome of the upcoming presidential election, U.S. foreign policy could face another major change. If Mr. Trump comes back to power, no matter how much Congress creates the legislation, we can't rule out the possibility that he will try to bypass or neutralize it in any way. While this Senate move could be a short-term solution, in the long run, we will have to keep an eye on the outcome of the U.S. presidential election and the consequent changes in foreign policy. Today, I took a closer look at the Senate's move to control the Trump administration's back-and-forth policy on Ukraine. It was news that gave me a lot of thought, including the role of the United States, the checks of Congress, and the tragedy of the war in Ukraine. What do you think of this news? Please leave your precious comments in the comments. And if today's video was helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll come back with more important and interesting news next time. Bye.